As we continue down the Assassin's Creed rabbit hole, I believe that this iteration right here, Revelations, was where Ubisoft's terrible, awful trend of annual releases started shooting themselves in the foot. The experience started off badly enough with the title Revelations. Let's put aside the stupid remark this time of Ubisoft deciding that early on in the series they decided to slap a subtitle on their newest game from the bucket of subtitles that dumb people who are bad use. However, do remember that Revelations is still early on in the series. Revelations is game number 7 of the franchise, and it's number 4 in the arbitrary main series, and if you are running out of ideas for your series at game number 7, maybe you should step back and ask yourself why these games are being made. That's the question I kept coming back to while I was playing this game. Why was this game made? And no, I'm not just being snarky for the sake of a bad joke, I seriously wanted to know why this game was being produced. Revelations was struggling to find a reason to exist in the first place. According to the box blurb, the title is supposed to reveal some critical information concerning both the Templar assassin conflict of Ezio's and Desmond's timelines after they started delving back into Altair's timeline for some amazing secrets. And that's the real issue in calling this game Revelations. This series is not like the TV show Lost, where the breadcrumbs in the plot are a trail leading back to some shadowy guy holding the entire load. And instead, it is like you're following a trail of breadcrumbs all the way back to a scarecrow missing its head and left arm. The game Revelations doubles down hard on the franchise's Desmond framing device, with Desmond having fallen into a coma at the end of Brotherhood when he stabbed girl character number 1 for seemingly no reason, and now his brain is fragmented and trapped in the Animus. Desmond then meets Mr. Ex Machina in the Animus mindscape, aka Subject 16, who adds jack goddamn squat to the game's story. There isn't a big enough reason for Ubisoft to bother adding this character in, because the only important thing he does is tell Desmond what he needs to do in order to piece himself back together again, and at this point, it shouldn't be a surprise that Desmond's solution turns out to be negotiating with Paraguay to stop World War III. No, wait, I'm mistaken. It's actually going back into the Animus to relive more memories of Ezio that will magically fix the problem, because that's what always happens. I'll be fair and say that Ubisoft did try to explain how this all made sense. Apparently, if Desmond relives enough memories of Ezio, then he can apparently access, despite being a fragmented personality file, and hitting enough synchronizations to hit something called a sync point that will pull his personality out of the coma. And that would be fine if that entire sci-fi explanation did not sound like the most bullshit thing I've ever heard, and I recently just finished Mario & Luigi Dream Team, a story that made as much sense as trying to thread a needle through the First National Bank. It's not a good thing when the plot of Revelations would have been exactly the same if the Animus itself told Desmond, yeah, we're gonna need you to go back there and, go do some more memories with Ezio. Okay. If you could get that done by Friday, that would be great. And that is why I keep coming back to the question, why? Why does Assassin's Creed Revelations exist? We get to learn nothing about Subject 16 other than the dead character that we thought was dead is actually dead, and Desmond goes through this entire journey inside the Animus learning nothing other than where the Temple with the Apocalypse plan is. Something that was already told to us in Assassin's Creed 2. But this brings up a silly point about all these god character people. If Jupiter knew where the Grand Temple was in the first place, did he not share that info with Minerva because all the gods are really stupid? Or did Minerva not share that info with Desmond because she's a dickhead? Or the more believable option, did Ubisoft not allow Minerva to share that information because Ubisoft is more interested in making a subpar franchise of games rather than a few quality titles? And this circles back to my original question, why? Why does this franchise continue to use the Desmond framing device plotline when it is always the worst part of every game it's in? It's terribly written, all the characters are useless, The entire Scooby Gang spends every game they are in basically moving from one plot landfill to the next without any idea of what any of them are doing. And that is why all these characters are terrible and annoying. None of them make decisions that end up affecting the plot, and instead they leave it up to the plot itself to move the characters forward. If you do decide to write a story where the environment itself is motivating the characters, you end up with a story about Lara Croft constantly falling off cliffs for no rhyme or reason. The other part about why the framing device fucks up in every game it's in is because, in spite of the entire framing device curbing off this solar apocalypse idea, it's boring as shit. Since it's easy to hate all of the characters in this story for not having the ability to do anything useful, and they have no personalities or witty quips, why should I care about what happens to any of them? Think about the character Desmond Miles. If someone in AC3 walked up to him and shot him in the face, would you seriously care? I certainly don't, but the other person is someone I do care about. Ezio Auditore, returning in Constantinople to find sacred keys to opening a vault in Masyaf. The vault was dug up by the Templars who took back the Assassin's HQ about 200 years ago, and recently found this place boarded up by Altair using some magic plywood that he learned about while studying the Apple of Eden. That's where this game starts, and I ask again, if this is all the game has going for it, why does this game exist at all? Yes, I understand that the whole point of Revelations is to get this revelation that Altair left behind in his library, and the vague anti-Templar thing of keeping whatever secret in there away from them, but that still isn't a good enough reason to produce an entire game around it. And yes, I know that it's typical for sandbox games to have weak plots, because you are building it more for the fuck around aspect rather than getting a good story. But Assassin's Creed games never put in any of those sweet side quest walkabouts like Skyrim and GTA 5 do, so what does it have other than its main campaign, which again is usually flimsy and not worth it? I'm not going to spoil what's in the vault yet, but let's talk about the keys themselves, because Altair, while in his elderly years, managed to uncover enough of the Apple's secrets to be able to inscribe his memories onto them so that the others could experience them in some sort of dream state. I guess Altair was one of those people who thought messages in bottles were a bit too hipstery for his grandmaster plan of teaching the future about why magic genie balls are dangerous. Altair's part of the story is that one of the assassins of old after Mualim's death managed to become leader of the assassins after acquiring the Apple of Eden, which forced Altair and his son to leave Masyaf. Those two were the only survivors since unfortunately Ubisoft decided to kill Maria Thorpe in this game. Yep, they just capped my favorite character of the franchise in the head. Great. Altair then returns to Masyaf 20 years later, kills the new assassin leader with the gun Ezio got in Assassin's Creed 2, again because of his work with the Apple, and then created the Vault to hide his secrets, and it sending his son to Alexandria, Egypt for some reason, so that Altair could die in Masyaf. The problem with this Altair stuff is that it runs into the framing device's problem. I could literally not care about the character arc of Altair, any of his family, or anyone in the Assassin's Order in the 12th century. Character development is not something that's going to be optional when you write a story. You need characters to actually be doing things that are interesting to watch happen in an entertainment product. Otherwise, you end up with these entire levels and cutscenes that are entirely made up of dull nonsense adventures starring the Cardboard Cutout Club. Now that I'm writing about this, it's kind of amazing to see Ubisoft's writing incompetence in the fact that they got the opportunity to put together a 3-tiered timeline of Desmond, Altair, and Ezio, and surprisingly, every one of them manages to totally suck the enjoyment out of the game that it was written for. The plot reads like a convoluted excuse just to make another game. A game that just spins its wheels so that Ubisoft can think of what to do next just in time for Assassin's Creed 3. And that is the ultimate problem with these franchises that become annual releases. You start making games that have no reason for existing in the first place. You start creating product that exists for the product's own sake, and that kind of product saturation will start to hurt the value of the franchise after several cycles. Why would you want the next game that comes out when it does the exact same thing that the last two you already have in your possession have done? And I'm sure that I'm not the only one that's pointed out that honestly, the series would be a lot better if Ubisoft simply abandoned the framing device completely. In Revelations, that's especially true because, and I'm sorry I'm only mentioning this now, the Constantinople sandbox is fucking awesome! It's beautiful, intricate, and it manages to hit a sweet spot between the fun of climbing buildings and then parkouring off them. Revelations adds some wicked fun ideas to the whole sandbox design of this series, with the hook blade, which allows Ezio a couple more feet to climb up, that speeds up the normally tedious mechanic of climbing to what is basically a vertical sprint along with a bunch of zip lines on the map, which allows Ezio to cut huge portions of his commute out. However, the problem with the zip lines is that they work with gravity, so they end up being very situational since they aren't marked on the minimap, they aren't literally everywhere, and you can't use them while running uphill. So if the entire reason this game exists is to just toss another sandbox onto the massive gelatinous blob of other sandbox games, at the very least, Ubisoft is managing to improve them with this game. Sure, it isn't GTA 5 where you get the ability to ragdoll at Mach 4 after your 27th carjacking that life, but it is still very enjoyable and a heck of a lot of fun to tool around as Ezio Auditore. Obviously, this isn't the only addition because Ubisoft simply can't help themselves and feel that they need new mechanics in every sandbox game, despite them being literally useless. The big thing about this game that ends up getting campaign missions devoted to it, and is accompanied by the most icons on the entire map, is Revelation's bomb crafting mechanic, which allows you to create a simply ludicrous amount of different bombs to throw at all your problems. Now, this type of thing would be useful in a traditional stealth game where distracting people is one of your best tools, but Assassin's Creed is not, well, I was going to say not traditional, but I really mean it's a bad stealth game. What is the point of making grenades, smoke bombs, and distractions when Ezio can already insta-kill anything he's looking at from almost any distance? You don't need a Rube Goldberg machine to murder someone if you can just as easily hit them in the head with a brick. I never used the damn bombs despite the game giving you tons of free resources to craft them and tons of benches everywhere to put them together. There's no point since they are instantly made obsolete by the fucking crossbow. Ezio is carrying around so many types of murder devices that I'm surprised his legs don't crack under the weight of his own backpack. At least if that did happen to our 55-year-old protagonist, our new Turkish assassins would definitely help us out. There was one guy besides Ezio that did help me enjoy the game a lot more than I usually would've, and that was Yusuf, a high-ranking member of the Constantinople branch of assassins, and he ends up with a brilliant voice actor, great design, and a lovely sense of humor that almost rivals Ezio for the title of Captain Numbskull and better AC character.
Well, as promised, if you want to learn how to craft your own bombs, I can show you. Don't touch that. One wrong move and bang! The building comes down.
Are you serious?
The look on your face! Here, I'll show you.
He shows up a bunch of times and helps Ezio out repeatedly before his inevitable off-screen death, which helps to flesh out the world of the sandbox a lot by giving you a motivation to keep pace with where the story is going. He's a part of the hook and the intrigue in this game, which is good because there isn't a lot to get distracted by in AC Revelations. I have no clue why, other than time crunch, that this happened, but Revelations decided to scrap a metric ton of the side quests from the earlier Ezio quadrilogy. Back in AC Brotherhood, you had the option to get distracted by a ton of pointless side quests with the courtesan, mercenary, and thief factions, along with your own assassination target missions. Then there was the War Machine and Katerina side quest that you could also deal with, along with the Hermeticist armor quest. Revelations has none of that stuff. and mostly defaults to story missions, which would be fine, but the problem is that because this is the start of the annual release schedule, the game only manages to put out 8 chapters, and without side quests and meaningful collectibles, you are going to get done with this game a lot faster than Brotherhood, accomplish less, and have less of a reason to go back post-story and finish everything other than bullheaded completionism. Like I said earlier, I love Constantinople to death, but why would I want to own it other than for the sheer joy of owning random NPCs to perpetuate my artist slavery ring? It's not even fun to torture them because they don't seem to register when I start capping them in the head. Like, come on, at least The Sims got that part right. The bigger issue with the sandbox is that, like the game itself, it doesn't seem to have much of anything going on. The quote-unquote antagonist of the game gets introduced around the halfway mark, and then dies by the 3/4 mark, only to be replaced by a surrogate antagonist that survives for a grand 60 minutes of screen time, who then dies after surviving a cliff edge fall, only to be thrown off of a completely different cliff by his father for being a screw-up. If Ezio was only in Constantinople to get the damned Masyaf keys, he shouldn't have gotten involved in the local politics in the first place. Yusuf himself says in the introduction to the city that the assassins already have a good handle on things. Plus, if Ezio is the master assassin that he really thinks he is, canonically, he should be able to pick up all the Masyaf keys without the Templars even knowing about it, so that the Templars wouldn't then be able to react fast enough to kidnap Ezio's new love interest to barter for all the keys he keeps taking. I'm sure that would still happen because Ubisoft writes the most cliched Hollywood stories for each of their games, and the consistently failing journey to find the word cinematic that highlight the idea that Ubisoft's writers can't actually write a story that makes any sense. And to be fair, I would be all for this series going straight historical sandbox. It's the one thing that they get right, and it is the meat and potatoes of all these games. And while I do respect AC Revelations for cutting down on most of the bullshit commute times and giving us more ways to insta-kill all the enemies in the game from long distances, because this game can't stealth for beans, the issue is that this brilliantly crafted sandbox has no content in it other than terrible collect all the things because we said so collectibles. Sure, you can buy the entire town just like you did in Rome, but there isn't as much benefit for doing that since the game loads down Ezio with tons of gear right at the get-go. The campaign missions are enjoyable, not groundbreaking stuff, but it's at least a good time sink. It's also not a good sign that the standout quest in this game happens in Chapter 2 of an 8-chapter game, and that is the Ezio Minstrel quest, which is memorable just for how goofy it was to see Ezio musically bragging about his dick in all of his previous murders. However, throughout all of this sandbox fun, the reason that it exists and the reason why this game fails is that it is serving a 3-tiered plot about Desmond, Altair, and Ezio that ultimately doesn't go anywhere or does anything interesting. Desmond's story is simply spinning its wheels until the next game, Altair's story isn't interesting, and Ezio's story is to go on a quest to get something that he already has. I said I wouldn't spoil it earlier, but we have to now. The entire point of the Ezio side of things, and this entire game, was to find another Apple of Eden that Altair hid underground and nothing else. There's not a grand revelation about the apple's purpose because Altair thought it was a brilliant idea to build 150 bookshelves for the vault and take the books he was going to fill them with off to his brother's house in Alexandria to be burned in the Great Alexandria Fire because Altair was kind of an idiot. It seems that at this time, Ubisoft was more interested in selling you on getting into a subpar franchise of games, setting up perpetual cliffhangers to great secrets that you never want to hear. Ubisoft was so desperate to have a reason to make this game that they made up some sci-fi bullshit about Desmond needing to play more Ezio memories to fix his screwed up brain, and you know, with that in mind, it kind of makes sense why Ezio's plotline doesn't go anywhere either. We're not here to learn the great secret, Desmond is just going along for the ride because he's forced to, by Ubisoft. I know that this video has gone on for longer than usual, but it cannot be understated just how screwed up it is in terms of making entertainment that Assassin's Creed Revelations screws up. And sure, you could say that of course the plot is stupid, it's a sandbox game, and the gameplay is what's important, and that would be true if Revelations' sandbox had content in it that was there just for the sake of side quests. but there are none. The side quests in this game are few and far between. You aren't just going to be running into them on the way to something else, so that leaves only the campaign missions, which serves the dull plot line of Ezio and Altair, which serves the bullshit nonsense of the Desmond storyline. The sandbox is there to support the plot instead of the other way around, which means that you end up banking on the worst quality of the worst part of your game. And this is the problem with putting out an annual release series, because you stop making games for the reason of wanting to craft a pulse-pounding story or to have thrilling gameplay, and you just start putting out generic products that can't stand on their own legs since they lose their reasons for existing once they exist. Video games are not TV shows, and you can't just say that you'll resolve things in the next iteration. At the very least, you should be aiming for a self-contained story. This is why games like Ocarina of Time, Half-Life, and the original Halo trilogy are beloved games, while the Assassin's Creed series is becoming a glorified, bloated mess that can't decide what it wants to do anymore. It's like a dementia elephant with Ezio's face crudely spray-painted on the side, which is not the way I wanted to end the arc of Captain Numbskull, but that's unfortunately where it stopped today. The game isn't all bad. It's one of my favorite sandboxes in this franchise currently, but the plot that the game put all the eggs into is so stationary, dull, and intangible that it just ruins the whole thing. I hope that 3 will at least be going somewhere and doing something, but until then, we're going to cap things off with our usual scoreboard. And give you guys a well-deserved victory for gamers. Thanks for watching.